The air smelled like metal and wind. Fog crept low through the gravel paths curling around pallets of gear, and the legs of crewmen too busy to notice. Elena stepped down from the transport van without a word. Helmet tucked under one arm, jacket zipped high against the cold. No one turned to see her. Conversations stayed clipped and sharp around the tent, all acronyms and flight codes. She walked quietly, her boots crunching through frost, stopping only when the next Chinook came in, low enough to rattle the tent flaps. Its landing lights cut through the fog in red pulses. Rotor wash lifted grit from the concrete and made her braid sway under her collar. When it touched down, she turned toward the ops board behind the canvas flap. Names were slotted in neat strips beneath crew IDs color-coded by assignment. Hers was at the bottom in faded ink, smaller than the others. Elena, observer. No call sign, no clearance status. Just permission to ride watch and stay silent. She didn't flinch. She touched the inside of her jacket pocket where a folded paper rested, corners softened from use. A flight map hand-drawn the night before. No one had asked her to do it. She passed a group of officers huddled near a heater, their heads bent in quiet urgency. No one looked up. One asked who she was. Another muttered something about a new observer. Then they changed the subject. Inside the ready tent, coffee cups and checklists littered the tables. A comms controller read off wind drift stats from a screen while others cross-checked elevations. Elena stood to the side, eyes scanning every movement, every chart without needing to speak. Her assigned aircraft sat near the pad ramp, down gear strapped inside. One of the techs inspected cables with bare fingers, pausing only to wipe away frost. She watched the rhythm of his check, memorized his pace, then moved to sit on the far edge of the wall. No one offered her a seat. She didn't ask for one. From her spot near the canvas, she could see the tower lights blinking against the mist and the dark curve of the helicopter she would ride with. Not fly, just ride. The cold clung to everything. Engines spun in intervals, crew rotated in and out like clockwork. Names buzzed on the radio, orders shouted, nothing paused for her. She stayed still, hands resting on her helmet, breath steady. The jump seat behind the cockpit was already tagged for her. No controls, no comms loop. Just a harness, a headset, and a view she was expected not to use. But she'd already traced the route, already mapped the turns. And when the time came, though no one knew it yet, she would be ready. Part 1. The Woman. Nobody noticed. Elena grew up near a dry airstrip just outside of Tucson. Her father was a retired aircraft mechanic who still kept an old Beechcraft frame in the back shed, half stripped, always a little greasy. He'd walk her through every bolt and hose on weekend afternoons, explaining things not like a teacher but like someone talking to an equal. By the time she was 12, she could name every part of a carburetor with her eyes closed. Her hands were always a little stained, her nails chipped from helping him pull valve covers or check hydraulic lines. He never once called it unusual that she wanted to learn. They didn't have much money. When her mother passed, her dad started taking more side jobs to keep them steady, fixing commuter vans and off-road trucks in the heat. Elena kept the house running and studied when she could. She read manuals from junked planes and borrowed aviation books from the local library, one at a time, never late. Flight school was always out of reach. Tuition, uniforms, housing. It wasn't something they could touch. So she made her own school. She mapped old flight patterns on brown paper bags, practiced calculations using kitchen timers, and a wind chart she found in a used bookstore. Sometimes she'd go up with local crop dusters, paying with work instead of cash. Her room was small, but the walls were filled with hand-drawn maps, some in pencil, others with marker faded from the desert heat. She'd study wind direction by watching leaves on the roof. She marked each shift like a science. Elena never talked much in class. She listened more than she spoke. Her teachers always said she was capable, but quiet to a fault. She didn't mind. Talking was never the point. She was there to understand things, not explain them to people who'd already decided what she was worth. By the time she turned 20, she had logged more hours watching flights from the ground than some trainees had in the air. She knew the feel of a downdraft before the instruments caught it. She could tell which way fog would settle just by the color of the sky near sunset. Her father passed not long after that. No ceremony, just ashes and a folded note he left in the back of the Beechcraft's cockpit. "You already fly better than most of them," it said. "Don't stop." She didn't. She applied to dozens of programs. Most turned her down before the interview. No college degree, no sponsorship, no official hours, just a name and a list of things she'd done with no one to sign off on them. Eventually, she found a training base that offered observer rotations for civilians with technical backgrounds. They needed warm bodies to balance loads. Elena just needed a seat. Now, years later, she stood on the edge of a military pad with boots worn thin at the toes. Her uniform was standard, but faded at the seams. Her gloves were creased from use, not new, not issued. Hers. She didn't wear makeup. Her hair was always tied back neat but unstyled. Her eyes looked tired but alert, always focused. When people saw her, if they saw her at all, they assumed she was a clerk or a tech. She never corrected them. It wouldn't have mattered anyway. She carried a diagram in her pocket, drawn with red ink over black lines, each turn mapped, each altitude tagged. She had drawn it by flashlight in her bunk the way she'd drawn 100 others. Elena didn't seek recognition. She didn't wait to be called on or credited. What she wanted couldn't be handed to her by anyone else. She just wanted to fly, and that had always been enough. Part 2, where status speaks louder than skill. Subpart 2.1, the airfield hierarchy. The airfield ran like a machine. Each part had its role, each rank knew where it stood. Pilots moved with practiced confidence, their flight suits, crisp radios, clipped names etched in bold across their gear. Briefings happened in short, coded bursts. Commanders barked numbers and headings, and subordinates nodded before moving out. Nobody hesitated. Nobody asked twice. Between rotations, the crews joked over steaming coffee gloves tossed across tables, boots kicked up on crates. There was rhythm hierarchy and unspoken rules about who belonged where. Elena wasn't in any of the groups. Her name wasn't called during briefings. She wasn't assigned to any equipment team or debrief station. When aircraft returned, she was the one standing just outside, the yellow tape hands tucked into her sleeves, waiting to climb aboard without slowing anyone down. She always rode in the same spot, just behind the cockpit, strapped into the forward jump seat where the auxiliary observers sat. She wore the same headset, but her channel wasn't connected to the crew loop. It gave her altitude and cabin pressure. Nothing else. The other seats were marked with rank or call sign. Hers was blank. Her ID tag didn't show up on the internal tracking system, so half the software didn't even register her as onboard. Instructors didn't make eye contact. Officers passed her without pause. The pilots learned her name only if it came up during the loadout sheet, and even then they rarely said it aloud. The gear she carried was regulation but aged. Her gloves were broken in. Her boots looked like they'd seen a dozen training cycles. No one asked where she got them. During prep checks, she stayed out of the way. No one offered her tasks, and she didn't expect any. Her presence made some uneasy, not because she disrupted anything, but because she didn't. Observers usually talked. Some asked too many questions. Others tried to prove they were more than just passengers. Elena did neither. She watched everything. Every checklist, every gesture, every time a pilot reset a trim control or scanned a horizon too fast. She noticed the details but never pointed them out. In a place that rewarded noise, she was quiet. In a space ruled by symbols of status and skill, she carried none. And yet she didn't seem bothered. The crews didn't quite know what to do with her. She was neither one of them nor outside of them. She was just there. Silent, still, focused. And for reasons none of them understood yet that made them nervous. Subpart 2.2, the placeholder. Lunch was always the same. 2 folding tables inside the auxiliary tent, one filled with voices and inside jokes, the other mostly empty. Elena stood for a moment in the gap between them, tray in hand, before moving to the far end like she always did. No one moved to make space. A tech leaned across her to grab a coffee lid, never acknowledging her presence. She sat quietly, her fork resting against the edge of her receipt so the wind wouldn't take it. Someone at the next table muttered the word placeholder. The others laughed, not cruelly, just casually, like it was obvious. She didn't look up. She ate slowly, like she was thinking through each motion. Her eyes drifted to the flight tent, where a new rotation was being logged on the board. Her name wasn't on it. That didn't stop her. She unfolded her diagram again, smoothing the corners, double-checking drift markers she had penciled the night before. She rotated the page, paused, then added a note in the margin, small and neat. Others spent downtime swapping stories or watching weather radar. Elena walked the perimeter, watching fog lines, noting wind shifts on her glove with a broken pencil. She built her maps from feel. At night, she rewrote the same diagrams in red ink, updating turn radii based on how the Chinooks moved that day. She traced the curves until they were muscle memory. She folded them, precisely tucked them back into her flight suit, and never spoke of them. No one noticed. Or if they did, they didn't care. She wasn't listed in the sim roster, didn't have command clearance, and wasn't part of any mission review. She sat through briefings without a voice in the circle. She listened, took notes by hand, and stayed a half step behind the group as they left. In the eyes of the others, she was nothing more than a seat filled to meet quota. Not qualified, not required, just there. But in her mind, she was mapping every shift in procedure, every pilot's rhythm, every pattern no one else was bothering to see. She wasn't there to fit in. She had stopped trying long before. She was there to understand. And when the time came, she would already know exactly what to do. Part 3, The Invisible Expert Sub. Part 3.1, One Voice, No Ears. The mission tent was full warm from bodies and backlit by static screens. Pilots circled a central table, tossing out headings and fuel estimates while instructors tapped at tablets. Elena stood just behind the bench line, not quite part of the circle, but close enough to hear every word. A new variable flashed across the top monitor. Wind inversion below 500 feet near the eastern ridge. One of the junior controllers called it out, but no one responded. Elena had seen it forming hours ago. It matched the downdraft she had charted by hand last night, tight along the saddle. She looked at the screen again, then quietly raised her hand. No one noticed at first. She didn't wave or speak, just lifted her palm with quiet intent, her elbow still tucked close. It took several seconds before anyone looked. The controller near the whiteboard glanced up, not at her, but in her direction. His eyes didn't meet hers. He just flicked his pen and shook his head once. "You're not flight rated for insertions. Hold questions for post-flight." That was all he said. The rest of the room didn't even pause. Someone started talking about rotor drift. Another laughed about missing a mark on descent. Her hand stayed raised for one beat longer, then dropped. No one said her name. Not then, not after. Just Observer 3 listed on a side screen in faded gray text. She didn't correct them. She stepped back out of the light and returned to her usual spot by the folding bench near the side wall. Her fingers rested on the edge of her notebook, but she didn't open it. Her face didn't change. No sigh, no scowl. Just stillness. She watched the feed update logging wind changes at LZ9. She noticed that no one else annotated the new risk point. She had already drawn 2 alternate paths around it. This wasn't new. It had happened before. Different room, different topic. Same result. Her voice didn't carry weight here. Still, she didn't stop paying attention. She didn't tune out or disengage. She watched harder. Her headset was linked only to pressure readings and position pings. She wasn't included in the main loop. If something went wrong during flight, she'd hear it happen. But no one would hear her. She stayed until the last update cleared. As the others filed out, tossing off jokes and patting each other on the back, she stayed seated, eyes on the board. Then she stood slow and calm and walked out into the cold again. Her breath fogged the air. Her boots made no sound. By the time they hit the next mission cycle, she had already corrected the turn radius on her chart. No one asked her why. No one asked her anything. Sub Part 3.2. The fog nobody tracked. The fog had been shifting for hours. Elena had watched it from the edge of the flight pad, tracking the way it curled around the ridge and dropped lower after sunset. She knew what that meant before the monitors caught up. She waited until the crew rotation cleared out, then slipped around the side of the fuel tent. The telemetry station was unattended, humming softly behind a plastic shield. The screen blinked with wind vectors and thermal drift, each shift logged in real time. She tapped the panel once to bring up the overlay. Wind pockets had begun forming on the east slope, exactly where she expected. Altitude density had dropped and visibility markers were blinking yellow. No one had flagged it yet. It hadn't hit the threshold for alerts, but she knew the pattern. That particular stretch of terrain held cold longer than the rest, and the valley floor pulled mist into the saddle like a trap. She took out her chart folded from the inner sleeve of her flight suit. Her gloves were still on, but she handled the paper like something fragile. The ridgeline was already drawn. She added 2 new lines in red marking alternate turns and timing windows. She worked quickly. Her handwriting was clean, each mark placed with care. No hesitation, no guesswork. Behind her, someone shouted across the pad. The turbines from another bird spun into motion. She didn't look back. She stayed with the data until the last set loaded. When she was done, she folded the map again and slid it into her jacket. The fog outside had thickened. It clung low across the landing grid, curling into the air vents along the concrete. She stepped away from the screen. No alerts sounded. No one came to ask what she had seen. Inside the tent, the whiteboard hadn't changed. Pilots joked around the debrief station. Controllers tapped out updates without noticing the shift outside. Elena kept walking. Her boots moved through the grit without pause. She'd already memorized the change in wind pressure, felt it in her neck hours earlier. She didn't need confirmation. She just needed time. By morning, the approach to LZ-9 would be too dangerous without corrections. The thermal arc would collapse mid-slope. But no one had drawn it yet. She had. And if the moment came, she'd be ready. Not because someone told her to be, but because that's what mattered. Part 4. The moment nobody dared. She stepped up sub. Part 4.1. Final inject. The final shift had already begun winding down. Debrief screens glowed soft in the dim tent chatter, low and tired, most of the crews halfway through logs and post-flight routines. Someone had cracked open the side flap to let in the cold, and the haze from fuel exhaust drifted through unnoticed. Then the radio flared once, sharp, loud, and wrong. It cut through the room and left a silence in its place. Inject live. Final evac, East Ridge. No beacon. 10-minute window. No one spoke. One of the instructors leaned forward and squinted at the terminal. Someone near the board checked their watch, muttered something about cutoff time. There weren't supposed to be injects after 2100. That was the rule. The drills were done. A few crew chiefs stood slow and stiff, unsure if it was real. The controller repeated it, voice flat, confirmation tagged. Elena was near the back wall helmet beside her boot arms folded. She didn't move. Pilots looked at each other. One of them opened his mouth to volunteer, then hesitated. His bird had run hot on the last set-down. Another reached for his gear, paused, and shook his head. Battery fault. Fuel low. Clearance expired. Ridge Command repeated the call. No autonav, no beacon. Degraded signal. It was the worst LZ on the grid. High wind, no line of sight, cross-cut terrain. The kind of landing that required more instinct than tech. Chief Rivas rubbed his jaw. He turned toward the board, eyes scanning the names. Then he stopped. "Who's up?" Nobody answered. The room wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. Every breath felt like it echoed. A controller checked the mission file. Another tried to reroute support. One by one, plans failed. No one had a bird ready. No one had a path mapped. No one had a name. The seconds passed too quickly. The evac team was still waiting on that ridge. Their beacon was down. They had maybe 9 minutes now. Boots shifted on the concrete. A headset clicked off. One of the flight engineers whispered something too low to catch. The air felt thinner. The walls of the tent might as well have closed in. Failure wasn't loud. It was slow and quiet and full of doubt, and it was already moving through the room. Subpart 4.2. I can take it. Elena stepped forward from the corner of the tent. No rush. No announcement. Just one step closer to the center of a room no one ever pictured her in. Her voice came low even. I can take it. It landed like a dropped pin in a glass room. Every head turned. Some blinked like they didn't know where the words had come from. Others stared like they'd forgotten she was even there. She didn't repeat herself. She didn't need to. Her hand briefly touched the pocket where her diagram was folded, then dropped again. I've reviewed the ridge twice, logged the downdraft path. The fog curve is forming across the saddle. I know the turn. Merritt scoffed from the back. You've never flown a full rotation. Rivas narrowed his eyes. You're not cleared for command. She met his stare without hesitation. I don't need a full sim. I've already flown it in blackout. I have the sequence. I can bring us in low under the fog. The saddle's still open, but not for long. The tent was silent again. It wasn't disbelief this time. It was calculation. Someone near the board muttered that she was guessing. She didn't look their way. No, I've already seen it. Chief Rivas studied her. His face wasn't angry. Just tight. Measured. You think you can run it blind. No nav. No beacon. Partial telemetry. Yes. Her voice didn't change. I've done the math. I've drawn the ridge. I can hold it for 1 minute. If I miss you, take control. That's when the air shifted. Something in the posture of the room changed, like gravity had tilted by 1 degree. The controller cleared his throat. LZ is still live. Clock's ticking. Rivas nodded once. He turned to Merritt, then to the rest of the crew. Spin up the bird. Then he turned back to Elena. His voice was quiet. 1 minute in the seat. You miss the turn, I take control. She nodded once. I won't miss it. She picked up her helmet and moved through the tent like the space finally belonged to her. No one stopped her. No one could. Outside, the mist was rolling in faster. The ramp of the Chinook was already lowering turbines beginning to wake. She didn't speak again. She didn't need to. She just walked into the fog like she'd always known exactly where to go. Part 5. Flying Blind. Guiding by Heart Sub. Part 5.1. Inside the cockpit. Elena climbed the ramp with steady steps. Her boots touched the steel like she had done it 100 times, even though this was the first with her name on the line. The rotors were already turning slow and heavy building rhythm with each breath of wind. Inside the cockpit, the lights were low. The seat beside her was still open, Rivas strapping in with calm precision. He didn't speak. He just watched her as she clipped into the harness and rested her hands on the controls. The panel in front of her flickered once, then blinked out. Nav overlay gone. Terrain model dead. The system had entered full blackout. She didn't blink. Her right hand adjusted the collective just enough to test lift pressure. Clean response. No delay. She eased it back to neutral and watched the gauges roll into life. The warning lights flashed yellow. Normal for a cold start with live override. She acknowledged, cleared them, moved on. Rivas leaned toward the console, then paused. His hand hovered, then dropped. He didn't correct her. He didn't need to. The Chinook shifted as the rotors spun faster. Wind pushed across the pad in bursts. The crew locked in behind her, quiet, waiting, unsure. She didn't hesitate. Her fingers stayed relaxed. Thumb near the trim, but never pressed. She brought the collective up and pushed the cyclic forward. The aircraft lifted a shudder through the frame, then a long breath of motion. The nose drifted right in the wind. Elena adjusted with a small left pedal input, then let it settle. The weight of the bird came alive under her palms. She could feel the drag through her wrists. She didn't fight it. She guided it. Rivas called out altitude. She answered with a heading voice steady. No flare, no strain, just command. They cleared the ridge base in 40 seconds. Fog swallowed the sides of the cockpit, thick and curling over the windows. The nav screen blinked once, then went dark again. Still no map, no overlay. She kept her eyes forward. The memory of the ridge map played behind her eyes like a second sight. The angles, the arc, the drift zones, all there. A gust pushed hard from the left. The Chinook tipped not sharply but enough to throw the balance. Elena nudged the cyclic half an inch, countered with pedal input, and held. Merritt leaned forward in his harness behind her. He said something low, more to himself than anyone else. She didn't hear it. Every movement she made had reason. She didn't reach. She didn't search. She adjusted with exact intent. Inside the cabin, no one spoke. Even Rivas, who normally gave constant altitude checks, stayed quiet. They banked left toward the first bend. Elena tilted the aircraft into the curve, adjusting collective drop, just as the wind shifted again. The fog peeled off the left window in thin layers. No visibility, no guides. Her breath stayed even. She watched the pitch angle, felt the engine hum, shift a quarter tone, and corrected with fingertip pressure. Below them, the valley opened. Uneven terrain, trees layered like shadows. She didn't look down. She already knew where they were. Rivas checked the clock. ETA to ridge 2 minutes. Elena dipped them slightly. Wind curl ahead. She felt it before it hit. The edge of turbulence knocked the underframe, and she rolled out of it before the others felt the drag. From the crew bay, one of the techs whispered, "He's never seen a flight this smooth." Someone else murmured something about glide vector. Still, no one said her name. They passed the second bend. The saddle was close now. Elena adjusted trim to reduce drift. Her eyes didn't move from the cloud ahead. She felt the aircraft like it was part of her chest. Fog thickened. She dropped altitude in 10-foot increments. The plateau on the other side was close, maybe 90 seconds out. Rivas reached forward once, checking a gauge. Then he stopped. His hands returned to his knees. She's flying it, fully. He didn't say it out loud. He didn't have to. Elena's hand hovered near the ramp light switch. It wasn't time yet, but almost. Her voice returned to the comms. Altitude holding. Saddle arc in 30 seconds. Collective drop confirmed. Merritt's knuckles gripped the side panel behind her. His eyes were wide now, not in fear, but disbelief. The fog ahead shimmered, just a faint glow. Flares. They had made it to the ridge. Elena shifted the nose left and began the descent. Her touch didn't change. She let gravity help but kept the aircraft under control like it was weightless. Final approach. Wind pushed back hard. She countered it in a second. The ridge came up fast. The slope appeared through the mist like a rising wave. Elena flared the aircraft, eased the gear down, and brought them in soft. No bounce, no overcorrection. They had landed. No one cheered. No one clapped. But everyone finally knew who was in that seat. Subpart 5.2. Landing where machines couldn't. The ridge loomed ahead, cloaked in fog thick enough to erase shadows. There were no markers, no visual guide. Just the slow pulse of a flare somewhere behind the mist and the faint tremble in the wind that gave her its shape. Elena didn't slow. She dropped altitude by feel, easing the Chinook down in tight, clean steps. Her hands moved with precision, not speed, adjusting for every gust as if she could see the current before it reached them. The aircraft drifted right with a sharp wind pull. She countered with a pedal tap and a trim hold, keeping the frame level. The engines rumbled in her seat, a vibration she understood like breath. Fog pressed hard against the windows. Rivas looked once toward the readouts, but they offered nothing new. All guidance had failed. She flew through memory alone. Below, a break in the cloud, a flicker of movement, then shapes. The evac team emerged like ghosts from the slope, silhouettes hunched against the wind arms, waving tight and low. Elena adjusted again, sliding into position without jerking the frame. She toggled the ramp light with one hand. 30 seconds. No one spoke. Merritt leaned forward in his harness, squinting through the side slit. He whispered it like a fact he hadn't wanted to believe. She's really doing it. The flare on the ridge flickered and burned out. One team member stumbled, caught by another, then pointed upward. The Chinook held its hover steady as breath just above the plateau. Elena flared the aircraft again, reducing forward pitch, and let the wheels kiss the earth. No bounce, just contact. Solid. Quiet. The wind tried once more to shove across the nose. She held it, not through strength, through control. The team ran low, heads down. Boots hit the ramp like hammers on steel. One lost his grip and was caught mid-step, then pushed forward again. Merritt called back, voice clear now. Team loading, all clear. Elena didn't move. Her fingers stayed on the controls, her focus locked ahead. Rivas gave her a single look. She didn't return it. She was still flying. Ramp sealed, light green, lift in 3. She brought the collective up smooth and even. The Chinook pulled from the ground like it had never touched it. Fog swallowed them again. Inside, the crew didn't cheer. They sat frozen, watching her. Merritt's hand gripped the overhead rail, but his face was still. The return was harder. The fog had thickened. The wind changed again. She didn't react. She adjusted. A crosswind slammed into the side of the frame. The Chinook rocked once. Elena rolled the cyclic with 2 fingers and brought them back on path before Rivas could reach for the throttle. He didn't try again. He was just watching now, like the others. Outside, the ridgeline fell away into darkness. Only the rotors cut through it, steady and sharp. No lights, no nav, just her. The path home was carved in her. She flew it not like she was guessing, but like she had drawn it into the air itself. A warning light blinked low power. She acknowledged it silently, adjusted speed, kept moving. Below them, the terrain was just shapes in shadow, but she didn't need to see it. She had already memorized its rhythm. A break in the clouds, the outer edge of the base glimmered with low gold arcs. Landing pad 5. She banked them wide, dropped altitude in a long, perfect glide. The crew didn't move. They were still staring. Final set, down in 12. She dropped them the last 10 feet. The wheels met concrete like they belonged there. No noise, no sway. Ramp unlocked. Evac team filed out. One turned back. Didn't speak. Just nodded. Elena powered down one system at a time. She removed her hands from the controls only after the final spin slowed. Her helmet rested in her lap. Behind her, Merritt let out a breath he'd held too long. She did it. Rivas said nothing. He just sat still beside her. No celebration. No clapping. Just the kind of silence that follows something nobody expected. Something perfect. The debrief room was packed. No one leaned back or checked their watch. The feed on the screen was quiet, showing only the flight path traced in red as it arced across the ridgeline. Telemetry pinged clean. Every turn Elena had made fell in line with the simulation overlay point for point. Even without nav or beacon, her path matched what the system would have recommended down to the second. A pause came as the descent replayed. The room stayed still. The flare, the hold, the landing. One of the analysts rewound it, played it again slower. A breath caught in someone's throat and wasn't let out. It wasn't just luck. It was design. Riva stood in the back, arms crossed, watching with no expression. Merritt sat near the front, elbows on his knees, head tilted like he was still trying to understand what he'd seen. Someone whispered her name soft, almost unsure. Observer 3. The label still read at the corner of the board. A few eyes glanced toward it, then back to the feed. The name didn't fit anymore. Outside the screen, someone stood and walked to the assignment board. No one said to do it. They just did. They pulled off the old slip, the one with her number and no call sign. They reached into the bin, grabbed a new strip, and wrote 5 letters. Not a rank, not a title, just a name. Elena. They placed it on the board right beneath the crew ID slot she'd flown from. It was quiet, but it stayed. She wasn't in the room. She hadn't asked to be. She didn't need to watch them realize. But everyone else did, and no one looked away. The hangar was quiet when she walked in. The sun had just started to rise, pale light stretching across the tarmac in thin bands. Most of the crew were still inside or asleep, but the door had been left unlocked. Elena moved with her usual calm. No rush, no change in pace. She walked up the ramp, boots soft against the metal, and stepped into the same seat she'd taken hours before. She didn't power anything on. She just sat there, running her hand over the console, checking the straps, brushing a bit of grit from the edge of the display. The aircraft was still warm in places. It remembered. She rested her fingers on the collective just for a second. No weight, no pressure, just a touch. Outside footsteps approached. Not loud, not hurried. A young pilot stopped near the ramp, still in partial gear, helmet under his arm. "They're calling you Ridgehawk now." Elena didn't look up right away. She finished adjusting the headset cord, set it down, then turned toward him with a small smile. "I'm just here to fly." The words weren't defensive. They weren't modest either. Just honest. Clean. The pilot stood there for a beat longer, then gave a short nod and walked off. No questions. No salute. Just quiet understanding. Elena leaned back slightly, eyes on the canopy where light filtered through. The bird sat still beneath her. Grounded. Resting. She didn't need to mark the moment. She had already lived it. And as the light rose, she stayed there for a while, alone in the silence she had earned.